Earlier this summer I went to a demo ride. I've been shopping around ever since and I finally settled on a Husqvarna TX300. After the demo ride I made a kind of first impressions video where I went over each of the bikes that I rode that day. I figured I'd make a similar video for this Husky. I'll go over what made me pick this bike in particular, what concerns I had about this bike going into it, and what I think of it now after the first ride. I decided pretty early on that I was probably going to go with either a KTM or a Husqvarna. I liked all of the bikes of the demo ride, but each one of them was lacking in one area or another. Mostly these issues were things like suspension, power, gearing, or just maintenance. From reading and asking owners, it really seemed like these were things that KTM and Husqvarna had figured out pretty well. It's been quite a while since they've had a major overhaul to any of their bikes, and those kind of things really make you feel like a beta tester. They have been pushing out the fuel-injected two-strokes on the TE models, and that leads me into why I chose this bike specifically. For the past several years, I've been riding a 2004 KTM 250 EXC. I never really cared one way or the other for the PDS suspension, but after riding the bikes the demo ride, I really kind of started to enjoy the lower seat height that came with the bikes with linkage. The lower end power and grunt of the 300s was another must-have. I did consider either the 300 Sherco 4-stroke or the 350 KTM and Husqvarna 4-strokes, but ultimately it was really hard to get away from the simplicity of the two-strokes. Between the Husqvarna and KTM offerings, it really seemed like the Husqvarna had a few more bells and whistles stock that the KTMs didn't have. The only big difference that KTM had that Husqvarna didn't was the PDS suspension on the XCW. So with all that said, and me having a Husqvarna dealership 30 minutes from my house, it was really decided for me that I was going to get a Husqvarna. I was really tempted by the new fuel-injected two-strokes, but ultimately I decided against them just because of the maintenance that was involved. I was looking through the manuals and it recommends that you replace the oil pump every 80 hours, and it's not a cheap part. Any advantage that could be had besides having the mixed gas could really just be solved by getting Electron. It was still an extremely intriguing option, but I ultimately decided it wasn't worth waiting for a bike to come to my area or the expense that was involved. I've never really utilized any electronics on my old EXC, and I figure if I do want any of them in the future, I could just add them to the TX. So ultimately, it just came down to suspension and transmission. Now, while I'd like to imagine myself riding hard enduro and picking my way through a difficult rock garden, the reality is that's just not how I ride. While we do have some pretty tight and technical trail in Michigan, it seems like the TX was just the better option for the vast majority of trails I ride. It seems like a lot of people, myself included, were concerned about the air forks, but after hearing nothing but rave reviews from people whose opinion I trust, it seemed like a non-issue. The last thing I was concerned about was the close ratio gearbox on the TX. I really take advantage of the long gears on my EXC, and after riding a couple of the close ratio bikes at the demo ride, it was really something I knew I was going to have to get used to. But I figured at worst it would be something that I would stop using as a crutch, and it would make me better as a rider at the end of it. The footage you're seeing right now is literally the first time I ever threw my leg over the bike with gear on. I only have about 2 hours of total ride time on this bike, but I figured it'd be a good time to give our first impressions. But keep in mind that I don't have everything figured out yet. Everything on this bike is completely stock. I haven't adjusted the jetting, suspension, or anything. I haven't taken it through anything too rough or tight yet, but so far I haven't noticed any issue with the suspension, and it's even better than my EXC is with a full tune from Enduro Engineering. It's probably too early to say anything definitive about the suspension, but so far I've been amazed with how good it feels. As much as I was ready to accept and deal with the close ratio transmission, it really hasn't been an issue at all. The gears don't even feel that short, and what they do lack you can easily make up for just by riding a gear high and chugging through. They have plenty of power to make up for it. The power is extremely predictable and reliable. While the bike definitely still pulled once you got into the power band, it didn't feel unmanageable at all. A lot of two-strokes I ride, you really don't feel comfortable hitting that power band in anything but a full straightaway, whereas this one I was completely comfortable hitting it whenever it felt necessary. I did play around with the mapping switch a little bit, but it didn't seem to make a huge difference. The good was that it seemed to lighten the power head even more, but the bad was that it really killed the over rev, which effectively shortened the gears. Many of the Husqvarna 2019 models have a redesigned rider ergonomics to make it more comfortable for the rider, and I really believe it. I've never felt so comfortable so fast on a bike before. Most bikes give me arm pump while I'm figuring them out, but this one didn't give me arm pump even after riding all evening. I can't overstate how comfortable and easy to ride this bike was. One of my biggest issues as a rider is I sit down way too often through stuff that would be faster standing. I've always just felt too unstable standing up through some of the turns. It doesn't show much in this video, but riding this bike I was immediately more comfortable standing up through stuff I would normally sit down and power through. Overall, this bike is nearly perfect, and I would really recommend it to anyone with a decent amount of riding experience. Whether you're riding fast or slow, you really couldn't go wrong with this bike. The only complaint I can really come up with is just that in the 2018 model, they had a very convenient handle on either side of the seat that's no longer there. And for as much as you pay for a brand new bike these days, you think they could include a skid plate on a bike that's meant to be ridden off-road. The front brakes are a little bit mushy, but I think that might just be air in the lines. I know some people have issues with the Mikuni carburetor, but so far I haven't had any problems with it. Those are legitimately the worst things I can think of about this bike. I'm sure more things will come up as I get more seat time, but at the moment I really couldn't be much happier. If there's anything else you're interested in that I didn't talk about, feel free to ask me. I'll try and do my best to answer any questions.